Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Cameron, and here on this YouTube channel, I love making videos about preparing for a career in the finance industry. A lot of the times, I'm offering my own insights as to tips for interviews and super days and applying for jobs and roles. But like I said, those were all my opinions and my insights. Yes, they were crafted from my own personal experiences. I wasn't just coming up with them out of thin air. I do always try to provide as much value as possible in my videos, but today I'm going to take a different approach. One of my goals for 2022 is to read 40 books, and one of the recent books that I picked up is What It Takes by Stephen Schwarzman. If you're not aware, Steve Schwarzman is the founder of Blackstone, which is one of the largest private equity / investment firms in the world. Steve started off his career in securities and investment banking and worked his way up the ladder before starting Blackstone. He now has a net worth of about $35 billion and is one of the most influential people in the whole business world. About 50 pages into the book, he actually has a chapter devoted to advice for interviews. When reading through this chapter, I was thinking, wow, this is really good advice. And of course, the idea to make a video about it popped into my head. Now, some of the advice, I have to say, is pretty simple, but some of the other insights that he offers are pretty new and creative. As you can tell, Steve Schwarzman is one of the most successful business owners, entrepreneurs, investors in the world. So I think that any advice he can offer is valuable, but especially advice about interviews, because I know that that is a popular topic that a lot of us college students have to face and go through. Whether it's applying for summer internships or full-time jobs, interviews are inevitable. And it's always important to be at your best in these interviews. And I think that these 8 tips that Steve Schwarzman provides in this book are going to do just that. So with that being said, let's get into the first tip. So the first tip is something that I 100% agree with, but it's also something that's somewhat changed in the recent years. This tip is be on time. Now, obviously, punctuality is still extremely important in interviews today, but with so many interviews moving to a virtual format, whether it's on WebEx or Teams or one of the other million softwares out there, showing up 15 minutes early, making an impression at the office is kind of a thing of the past. A lot of the times the recruiters will just tell you, hop on the Zoom call right at the specific time, right at, 12 noon on the dot, just so that you don't interrupt anyone else in a previous meeting. But I think it still stands. Being on time is 100% important. Being on time alone isn't necessarily going to get you the job, but I think being late will certainly make your chances that much harder. But anyway, Schwarzman says in his book, be on time. Punctuality is the first indicator of how much thought and preparation you have put into an interview. And I think that's definitely true. That's kind of going off the point I just said, where if you show up late to your interview, that kind of shows the recruiter, shows the company that you're not necessarily taking them seriously. And if you're doing that for an interview to get the job, what does that really tell about you and foreshadow for the kind of worker you'll be at the company? So that is the first tip, and that is to be on time. The second tip is something that I've also talked about in my videos, and it is to be authentic. Schwarzman writes, interviews are a mutual assessment, a bit like speed dating. Everyone is looking for the right fit. Be comfortable and natural, and chances are you'll be liked for who you are. If you share who you are and the interview results in a job offer, that's great. If it doesn't work, it's likely that the organization wasn't right for you either. Better to know and move on. I think this is 100% important, not only to take with you into interviews, but also when you're considering where you want to work. I know for myself, this last recruiting cycle, I actually had 3 job offers at one point, and I needed to make a pretty big decision. I ended up deciding to go with the company, KPMG, where I had the most authentic conversations in the interviews. I felt like I was being myself, and I felt that that was accepted and reciprocated with the interviewer. Kind of going back to that first point, being authentic in the interview certainly can translate and be a big part of the rest of your time with a company. It's really important to be with a company that likes you for who you are, and if that's the case, it's gonna make your whole experience with them that much more enjoyable. So number 2, be authentic. Number 3 is to be prepared. Learn about the company. Interviewers always enjoy discussing what's happening in their environment. Plus, it's a good way for you to hear how enthusiastic an employee feels about the place where he or she works. Describe what draws you to the company and why. An interviewer wants to understand your motives and whether they fit with the organization's culture. So this kind of takes the approach of being prepared to a different level than I often talk about in these videos. I obviously mentioned how it's really important to have the technical skills locked down going into an interview, but I think this tip by Schwarzman is really interesting just because it really wants you to kind of get a feel from the interviewer how they feel about the company. If the interviewer themselves isn't enthusiastic about the work they're doing, it's definitely something to take note of. Also, being prepared in general will just take away a lot of the stress and anxiety that goes into the time before an interview. I know from my own experience, anytime, I really understood the technicals, I did my research on the company, I could sleep easy the night before, and going into the interview, I knew that I had done the best on my part and that I had prepared myself to the best of my abilities, and that whatever happens, happens, but I put the work in and could be happy with the result, whether it was good or bad. So that's number 3, be prepared. Number 4 is to be candid. Don't be afraid to talk about what's on your mind. Focus less on impressing the interviewer and more on being open and striving for an honest conversation. I think that's really important. A lot of the times in interviews, it's really easy to just try to talk yourself up and impress the interviewer, whether it's, extrapolating about your experience on Excel or with a student organization. It's really easy to just focus on impressing the interviewer and less on just having a regular, honest conversation. Being candid will just allow the conversation to flow that much better and will make the whole experience a lot more enjoyable for both sides. One of the things I always tell myself going into an interview and during an interview is that both people want the interview to go well. No one goes into a conversation wanting it to end awkwardly. If you take this into consideration during the interview, it takes a lot of stress off, just because you understand that the interviewer is not just trying to get you on every single question. They want the conversation to go well. They want it to be a friendly conversation and to leave the interview feeling good about the candidate. So that's number 4, be candid. Number 5 is probably just one of the most important tips in all of life, and that is to be confident. Approach the situation as an equal, not as a supplicant. In most situations, employers are looking for someone who can hold the table, provided they're not arrogant. And I think that last aspect is really important. The line between confidence and arrogance can sometimes be blurred, and it's definitely important to always stay on the side of confidence and not cross over. I think this is a really good point, and the fact that he mentions that employers are looking for someone who can hold the table is always important to consider. They don't just want someone who's gonna suck up to the interviewer and be a yes man. They want someone who can take charge, be assertive, and really stand up for what they believe in. Now, confidence is certainly something that can be worked on over time, but one thing I always like to say, and that I've heard in a lot of other YouTube videos, is that even if you don't have confidence right now, confidence is definitely something that you can fake. If you fake acting confident, the other person honestly will never know. You might be terrified and super anxious, but if you act confident and you're faking being confident, then that will be exactly how you come across. But of course, it is still okay to say, I don't know, to certain questions. This again goes along with the aspect of being candid and authentic. Sometimes saying that you don't know the answer to a question is the much more confident answer than trying to make it up and guess as you go. So this one's kind of a no-brainer, but definitely makes you think about things in a different sense, and that is to be confident. Number 6 is to be curious. The best interviews are interactive. Ask questions, ask for advice, ask your interviewers what they enjoy most about working for their organization. Find a way to engage interviewers, and always make sure the conversation goes both ways. Interviewers like to talk too, so that they can share what they know. I think this is a really good tip. I myself always go into interviews with at least 5 questions for the interviewer. If I'm able to look them up on LinkedIn beforehand, I try to create questions that are very targeted just to them and aren't just cookie cutter questions that I could ask anybody. This makes the interviewer feel way more special and shows them that you did your research. Now, also, it's important to not just stick to those 5 questions you wrote down before the interview. It's even more important to listen during the interview. This is when the best questions can be found. If you're having a great conversation and the interviewer says something that kind of sparks your interest, definitely note that and bring it back up at the end of the interview when they ask if you have questions. This not only shows the interviewer that you were actually paying attention during the interview and not just thinking about yourself, but it also shows the interviewer that you're adaptive and that you're always thinking on your feet, which is certainly an important characteristic trait in any business role. So that is number 6, be curious. Now, the last 2 points that Schwarzman brings up I thought were pretty interesting. Number 7 is avoid discussing divisive political issues unless you are asked. In which case, be straightforward. Describe what you believe and why, but don't be argumentative. This book came out a few years ago, but I think this holds true even more right now. Especially in the world of COVID, there are so many different opinions about it. And while you're on a Zoom, it's pretty obvious the main reason for that is because of the pandemic. I do appreciate that Schwarzman says that if you are directly asked, be straightforward. And I think that's a really valuable piece of advice. This kind of comes back down to that be confident section. It's okay to have different opinions than someone else, whether it's your friend or the interviewer. This is actually good to have different opinions. But just because you have different opinions doesn't mean you need to convince the other person that yours are correct. If you're directly asked about your opinion on something, state it and explain why you believe that, but don't try to shift the other person's opinion about it. So I thought this was definitely a very interesting tip and something that is probably even more relevant today than it was when he first published this book a few years back. The last tip is something I honestly haven't seen anywhere else before, but it says, mention people you know at an organization only if you like and respect them. Your interviewer will be judging your taste in people. I think this is something that's not always thought of, and I can kind of vouch that from my own experience, anytime I talk to anyone at an organization, I would then always try to kind of bring that up in my interviews. This, of course, was regardless of if that conversation went well or how I thought of that connection. But I think this is just such an interesting point because it's never really talked about. There's the famous quote that your network is your net worth, and that 100% applies to this note. You want to show the interviewer that you are associated with the right people with the right intentions. Chances are, if you like someone and you respect someone, they're gonna like them too. But it's important to be authentic and to not just name drop anyone you know at a company. This often can go a long way in either direction. Especially as you move forward in the business world, it's all about connections and who you know. So although this piece of advice doesn't directly say it, but it really undertones the importance of making the right connections in the world. Hopefully, you never have to interact with someone who you don't respect or you don't trust. But it's important that if you do, you take that into consideration and don't just try to name drop their name just to show the interviewer that you know people at the company. So that was the last tip, and that was to mention people you know at an organization only if you like and respect them. So those were the 8 pieces of advice on how to approach and attack an interview that Steve Schwarzman included in his book. I understand some of them could be regarded as common sense, but I hope that his explanation as well as mine kind of framed them in a way that maybe you hadn't considered before. I know even for myself, after going through honestly hundreds of interviews and making several videos like this already, I still was able to learn a lot through this. At the end of the day, interviews are simple. It's all about showing the interviewer that you are invested in the conversation and willing to learn and evolve. If you do that, it goes a long way, and that shows a lot about who you are going to be as an employee. All 8 of the tips are going to be listed on the screen right now. So I definitely recommend taking a screenshot, saving this video to your favorites list to look back and reference on anytime you're going into an interview, and really just sit and think about the tips. As I said before, Steve Schwarzman is one of the most well-respected and influential people in the entire business world. He certainly did not get to this place of influence by accident. He's extremely hardworking and knows how to connect with people to get the job done. If you enjoyed this video and you're not already subscribed, I definitely recommend you do so. I've got a new video dropping every single week just like this, and you don't want to miss out. As always, if you guys have any questions at all, you can reach out to me on Instagram right here at Galbraith. Also, if you want the best daily news, subscribe to the Morning Brew down below. The link is in the description. And with all those plugs out of the way, I wish you guys the best of luck in your interviews and future endeavors. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.